I had never actually, I mean, entirely based on reasons like for my gender and not really feeling settled in my gender identity, never felt comfortable identifying as gay. People would always assume that I was just like I had a lot of deep internalized homophobia, and in reality, I just didn't like trust that I could communicate or articulate my sexuality in a way that actually accounted for my evolving gender presentation. Even though I've publicly identified as trans, like people still see me and interpolate me as a man when I walk around campus. And in some ways that's like a buffer to me in that it prevents me from having to experience some kinds of violence. I'm obviously read as queer almost immediately, and so that makes me susceptible to other forms of violence, but in terms of like, yeah, being able to even like comfortably identify like socially, that's not something that I've been able to do since I've transitioned. There are changes that I want to make physically. I don't think changing my body would like make me feel more justified in being able to like embody those experiences as feminine as like I experience them. The changes aren't like, they're not like what actually makes my body feel a certain way. It's like allowing myself to like feel feminine and to like understand myself as feminine that allows me to use my body in a certain way. A lot of my friendships have changed since I started transitioning and identifying as trans. I would try to like make sense of that gulf or like that division by like projecting my own insecurities about like how I feel about myself, which are usually like traumatic experiences, right? Like that would be like my rationale for like how I thought that like someone was like understanding me. I've had so many experiences like in so many different parts of campus where like men will like just come up to me and start like touching me. I would just continue to have these experiences where I couldn't like negotiate my like sexual boundaries with people, and feeling like overwhelmingly just like insecure. I'd feel tired. I would exert a lot of energy just to like repress all of the feelings that I would have. Even things like I couldn't allow myself to like privately like experience any kind of like bodily pleasure. Like showering would be physically painful for me. I'm struggling in all these ways that like you can't recognize as legitimate, because I'm not, one, a cis woman who can just claim victimhood immediately, and I'm also not someone who's just gonna like go out and talk about these things if I don't feel like I can trust the people who I'm sharing with. As a way of processing all of my trauma, I had really just started drawing to like map my experiences, and then I found that in the context of what I was studying, I was developing my own language to really work through my relationship to broader social structures, other people, gender, race, sexuality, and then found like, oh, this is actually a really great way of kind of meeting my own needs with the material and finding a space to like grow through that. A friend had described my work this way as like being diagrammatic, right? So I would use this like checkerboard patterning often to talk about like the experience of like cognitive like dissociation that I would experience. So feeling like split between black and white, and that would be used to compose like these figures that were mostly faces, that were like reflections of how I saw myself. I saw myself split between like good and bad, like, you know, whatever, like these kind of like stark dichotomies. When that framework broke, or when I allowed myself to like see through that framework, my work then started to be a lot more about like form and bodies. So it was about like creating these shapes that like occupied the illusion, I guess because they're drawings, of like three-dimensional space that in many ways felt like a gesture of how I wanted myself and my own body to be able to live and exist in space. And it felt like I was more channeling or like outlining the process of like creating the possibility for a certain kind of existence to emerge, rather than trying to define like the nature of my existence. It's not just that I am this like damaged, anxious, you know, person. It's that like an anxiety runs through me and I can articulate it in a gesture that like expresses itself as like a hand movement, or I can express it as like the creation of this like 3D object that is like muscular, or that looks muscular, right, but that is expressing bodily tension, that I can then sort of like abstract or like put out. And that feels like what I guess my work has always been about, moving away from this kind of like almost like egotistical like identification with like myself as a person, and understanding myself as a person as being like influenced by my emotions and my states, and that those states are always shifting and evolving. I would like my body to be like slightly differently, but also like in working through like, yeah, working through like the physical sensations of like trauma, like I've kind of been able to like accept that like my body is right like in itself. I used to just see like a man and now I like can appreciate like the curves and like the softness of my face in a new way. Um, which I also feel, I mean, which are due to the hormones, but also like reflect a genuine like lightness in like my persona and like my affect that I'm able to hold. And I feel like if people were more open to seeing like black people generally and like gender nonconforming people and like trans feminine people specifically as like happy and like light, we wouldn't have to hold this tension. My roommate has said to me a lot that never want to take like too seriously, but I really appreciate it. He'll like say like you're a natural leader. And that's been something I've been told a lot, um, and has been difficult for me to own. I think in the context of like my experiences of like trauma and like vulnerability, but I do feel like I like to and want to be able to support people, and I think having worked through a lot of my own personal things, like people kind of like a lot of people naturally look up to me as like someone who can manage and like grapple with and like work through a lot of things, and I take that seriously, I guess, in terms of like what it imparts to other people. I care about how I make people feel and like how people feel in response to me, and I'm recognizing more and more that that has almost everything to do with other people than it does with me, right? I am trusting more and more just like my own capacity for sort of like kindness and like empathy. My ability to communicate, I think, is being central to that. Like developing a language for myself to articulate my own experience, however like unique or particular, or like to whatever extent it alienates me from other people, actually gives me this means of like connecting with those same people. And so I trust my ability to like do all those things, and like I think it was only, yeah, it's only when I doubt myself that I feel like um, I'm more susceptible to like what other people think of me, or like trying to adjust or like modify myself to meet other people's expectations. You really need to trust that the people who like see you and the people who understand you in your complexity are the only people you need to like value and care about. Prioritize for yourself the people who make you feel like your best self and don't feel like you have to prove anything in order to be like authentically XYZ identity.